Let's take a breath together. We're finishing up. Changing the world is up to us. How many people have implemented changes that do change the world this month? How many people will continue to do that, those things, and continue to look for ways that we can change the world? Because it is up to us. It is up to us. We've talked about all the different ways that we can do this thing called life. All the different ways that we can do this thing called life together. Because believe it or not, we have to do it together. All the ways that we can make little shifts within ourselves that will have a ripple effect out into the world. And that's how we change the world, because when we change our world, when we change ourselves, it changes the world, the greater world. And so that's what we are focusing on this month and beyond, but we've really been focusing on it this month. And so today I'm talking about a matter of perspective, a matter of perspective. Perspective being the way that we look at the world, perspective being our viewpoint, our attitude toward things, our attitude toward people, our belief system, our perspective. And everything is a matter of perspective, because our perspective is the lens through which we see the world. Our perspective is the lens through which we not only see the world, but the way that we live in the world, according to our perspective, according to how we see the world. And our perspective affects not only how we live in the world, but it affects our relationships with others. And it affects our relationships with ourselves. And therefore, it affects the world. Because everything is connected. Everything is connected. And so when we're looking at perspective, one of the things that we have to recognize is the way that we see things depends on how close we are to it. It depends on how close we are to it. It depends on, again, what our experiences have been, what our training has been, what our belief system is. Everything determines our perspective. And so looking at that, I'm reminded of just a little story of a minister, an artist, and a cowboy who went to see the Grand Canyon. And the minister got there and saw it, and he said, "Oh, look at the majesty and the wonder of God's creation. This wonderful, wonderful place, this wonderful creation." And the artist looked at it and said, "Wow, look at the beauty here. Look at how much I can paint, how all the colors, all the magnificence of the beauty here." And the cowboy looked at it and said, "This would be a terrible place to lose a cow." Thank you, Dave. Isn't that what perspective is all about? The way that we see the world is according to our own perspective, and the way we treat each other is according to our own perspective, and the way that we live in the world is according to our own perspective. And so today I'm inviting you to consciously choose to shift your perspective. Consciously choose. We're talking about consciously choosing this month. And I'm inviting you to consciously choose to shift your perspective. And I think one of the greatest ways to do that, and the way that I'll start out with, is by just remembering to center down. And before I even get into the specifics of that, this is the Thanksgiving season. It's a time when we come together with family and friends. And sometimes we only come together with family once a year, and that's at Thanksgiving time. And oftentimes I hear how people dread that, getting together, because we know that it takes us back to places that we don't particularly like or that weren't particularly happy, but we do out of obligation or a sense of whatever it is that brings us back together with family. We get into that. And this can be a very stressful time of the year. This can be a very stressful time as we go into these holidays, and particularly Thanksgiving, when we think about family and getting together with family. I think I've mentioned to you before, I have a minister friend in California who says that family is God's laboratory. That's God just gets a chance to really work when we get with family. And so just keeping that in mind, I think it's really important for us to really keep in mind that it's all a matter of perspective. Even when we're going with our family, and last week I was talking about diversity and oneness. There's diversity, in our families, all kinds of diversity. And when we get together, we are certainly aware of our differences when we're with family. And so we have to start to really look at how can we be in those places of oneness? How can we be in that place of recognizing that there's diversity, but also shifting our perspective so that we can be in a place of joy, be in a place of peace, not be in a place of chaos, be in a place of wholeness, be in a place of oneness, be in a place of love, be in a place of calm. And so the first thing I'll invite you to do is to remember to center down. Remember to center down, not just for Thanksgiving, but certainly for Thanksgiving, since that's where we are now at this time. But remember to center down. Centering down brings us back into that place of oneness. That brings us back into that place of peace within ourselves. That brings us back to the center of our being, where we remember who we are. And we can be anchored in our awareness of who we are. And that's what centering down does for us. Because there's so much going on in the world that keeps us disturbed. And as the reading talked about, there's room enough for chaos. And what we need is room enough for peace in our lives. We need to seek room for peace. And in seeking room for peace, we do that by centering down. And that was one of the reasons that I really wanted to start the midday meditation service here at the CLF, just so that in the middle of our day, we have a place to anchor. We have a place to center. And even if you don't get to come here during the week, at noon, this whole community can center down wherever you are. This whole community can just remember that this is our anchoring time. This is our centering time. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, even if you can't stop, you can just take a breath and return to center. Return to center. Howard Thurman has an essay entitled, "How Good It Is to Center Down." And he says how good it is to center down, to sit quietly and watch oneself pass by. He says, the streets of our minds seethe with endless traffic. I love that. The streets of our minds seethe with endless traffic. With endless traffic. Our spirits resound with clashings and noisy silences, while something deep within is hungering and thirsting for the quiet moment and the resting lull. And so it's that something within that's hungering and thirsting for the quiet moment that I'm inviting you to honor throughout each and every day. Just remember to center down at some time during the day. Remember to center down. And the more you do that, the more you can automatically do it. The more you can take a breath and return to center. You can take a breath and return to center like that. And that's what I'm inviting you to do as we start to look at how to shift our perspective. That's how we shift it. Just by knowing that there's a place that we can return to deep within each of us that is hungering and thirsting, for that resting lull, for that quiet moment. And so that's the first thing we want to look at when we're talking about shifting our perspective, is just centering down, returning to center, and then moving out into the world from that place, moving out into the things that we have to do from that place of center, interacting with each other from that place of center, that place of anchor, being anchored, of knowing who we are and remembering who we are and remembering our connection to the whole. When we can do that, then that's how our perspective shifts. Ernest Holmes says the perception of wholeness is the consciousness of healing. The perception of wholeness is the consciousness of healing. So the perception of wholeness is what we're always looking for, that wholeness. That's the consciousness of healing. And we can get there when we're centered to that place where we can see wholeness. And so when we're looking at perspective shifts after we do the centering down, the next thing we have to do to shift our perspective is to take a breath and take a step back. Take a step back from whatever it is we're involved in. Sometimes we can't take a physical step back. Sometimes we just have to take an energetic step back, whatever is going on. And when we can take a step back, we get a chance to see the whole picture. We get a chance to see the big picture. No, if we're too close to something, if we're too involved in it, if we're too close to the problem or the issue or the challenge or whatever it may be, then we don't get to see the big picture. We just get to see the little things, the flaws. We get to see the things that irritate us. We get to see the confusion around things. We get to see those things that make us feel disconnected. When we can take a step back, we get to see the whole picture. When we're too close to it, when we're too focused on it, it's kind of like looking in a magnifying mirror. You know those mirrors that show you all the flaws? Those mirrors that show you everything. And then you start to pick out all the things that are wrong, all the things you don't like. If you're looking at your own face in the mirror, my goodness, it's kind of scary sometimes. But you know what? If you put it down and get a smaller mirror, or if you stand back and look into a bigger mirror, wow, things look different, don't they? That's the way it is with our lives. That's the way it is with our lives. When we are so close to the problem that we can't see anything but the problem, that's when we get that's what Mark Nepo in the Book of Awakening calls misery. Misery is a moment of suffering that is allowed to become everything, he says. Misery is a moment of suffering that is allowed to become everything. Anybody know what that means? Just a moment of suffering that is allowed to become everything. And you know those little things that can happen, and we think about it, we gnaw on it, we talk about it, we ruminate over it, we do all this, and it starts to blow up, and it starts to blow up, and it starts to blow up, whatever it is. Whatever little thing. You can even bring it back to your physical body. If you hurt your hand and there's pain there, then that's where your focus is. And so you focus on that, and it hurts more. And you focus on that, and it becomes more of a problem. And you focus on that, and you begin to be aware of all the things you can't do because your hand is hurt. And you focus on that, and the next person who passes you is going to bump into it because that's where your focus is. And then you think about that pain, you think about that pain, and that's where your focus is. When we can shift our perspective and step back and realize this is a moment of suffering, this pain in my hand, but I'm not going to allow it to become everything. Think about other little things that we do. Very rarely do I wear a white shirt because invariably my belief is that I'm going to spill something on it. And so I do. And when you got on a white shirt and you spill something on it, then that's all I'm focused on all day. And everybody I meet, I want to explain to them why that spot is on my shirt. So I can't go through my day because I'm thinking about this spot on my shirt. So this little thing, this little moment of suffering that I put this spot, spill something on my shirt has become everything now. This is what suffering looks like. This is what misery looks like. This is what our focus, our perspective is like when we're focused, when we're too close to the problem, so close to the problem that we're focused on only the problem and not the big picture of how nice I really look today, except I have this big spot on it. Maybe a little spot on my shirt. But you know what I'm saying? It's like this is how we get caught up in being so close to the problem that that's all we can see. That's all we can see is the problem. And so when we are willing to step back and see the big picture, when we're willing to step back, to shift our perspective and see the whole thing, then we get a chance to see what happened back here and what may be happening over here and what's happening all around us. And we realize this little thing that we were so focused on is not that important anyway. We can put it in perspective and we can move forward in our lives and we can move forward with ease and with grace and with comfort and with peace and peace of mind. And this is how we can go and be with our families this Thanksgiving. This is how we can go and be with those people who have different political beliefs, different religious beliefs, don't know why you go to that church, they don't know why you voted for that person, they don't know whatever, and none of that will matter when we can shift our perspective and look at the big picture and recognize that we're all one. Recognize that we're all a part of the same family. Recognize that we each and all have our own ideas and our own ways of being in the world. And that I don't have to judge yours and you don't have to judge mine. And we can just be here together. We can just be in this place of oneness. We can just be on this planet together. And we can just be in this moment and spend this time together in love and in peace and in harmony and talk about those things that we can agree on to talk about, that it's raining outside or that the sun is coming out or whatever the case may be. But there's a way that we can do that when we're willing to shift our perspective. Let's take a breath. When we're willing to open our hearts, when we're willing to open our minds, and when we're willing not to make somebody else wrong because they're different or they think differently or whatever the case may be. When we're willing to shift our perspective about the way we look at things and step back and just see the big picture, that's how we are consciously choosing to shift our perspective so that we can change the world. Because when we shift our perspective and see the world differently, we live in the world differently, and everybody that we come in contact with is affected by our seeing the world differently, our moving through the world differently. That's how the world changes. Just one person at a time, 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 one person at a time. This is how it happens. And so it's important for us to keep in mind that we can shift our perspective by taking a step back, looking at the big picture. And one of the other things I want to remind you to do is to really start to honor the other person. When we're dealing in our relationships, recognize the other person's pain. Recognize the other person's pain and discomfort. If we're having a disagreement, honoring that person by recognizing their pain in addition to our own. You know, oftentimes when we get into a disagreement with somebody, we immediately think about how we feel. We immediately think about the pain it caused me. If there's something that you said or a way that you acted, I'm thinking about the pain that it caused me. And then I get into my head about it. And I get into the stories that I tell about it. And I get into what I think your motive was for saying that or doing that or whatever. And then I get into all the other stuff that separates us. If we can just stop, that's a way of stepping back. Stop and take a breath. And just look at your pain. What's causing you to speak that way? What's causing you to act that way? What causes that person to go on and on that way? To hurt people, to be mean, to be cruel, to be rude, and all that stuff. What's happening with them? When we stop to do that, not only are we honoring their personhood, but we are really looking at, this is a person who's before me. We talked about everybody having intrinsic value. This person has value. And that recognition will make us start to inquire of them, to try to understand what's going on with the other person. Rather than getting stuck in our own emotions, rather than getting stuck in our own hurt feelings, rather than getting stuck in our own fear, rather than getting stuck in our own anger, rather than getting stuck in our own whatever it is, but thinking about the other person. And if you can talk with them, asking them, what's going on with you? Not in an accusatory way, not in a judgmental way, but just asking, what's happening with you? What's going on? Is there something that you'd like to share? What's your thinking about this? And you know what? Oftentimes when we do that, we'd be surprised at the answers we would get. Because ordinarily, when we're coming from a place of our own emotions, our own anger, our own pain, our own discomfort, it comes across as judgment when we're dealing with the other person, and they become defensive. And they respond to us according to the way we come to them. According to our own perspective is how people respond to us. And so when we can shift our perspective and turn the focus on them, then it gives them an opportunity to look within also. It gives them an opportunity to shift their perspective. It gives them an opportunity to explain to you what's happening. It gives an opportunity for the door to communication to be open so that hearts can begin to open and defenses can begin to fall away and blame can begin to fall away and judgment can begin to fall away. And then we get into the place where we can communicate honestly and openly with each other. And we begin to see how the presence of God is working in that situation. Because when the defenses fall, when the judgment falls, when the blame falls away, and there's nothing but the two of you there, it's God meeting itself. It's God talking to itself. It's God interacting with itself. It's God recognizing itself. And that's how we change the world, because we're changing that relationship. And we begin then to see the other person differently. We begin then to interact with the other person differently. We begin then to understand something that we would not have understood had we not said, wonder what's happening with this person. I wonder what's the cause of this pain that's causing this person to act this way. When we begin to recognize the other person, it opens our hearts in a way that it would not have before, because our heart would have been closed according to our perspective. When we open our hearts by inquiring, we open our hearts by seeking to understand each other, we also begin to look at ourselves, and we also begin to see what our role may have been in that situation, or what our role may have been not only in that situation, but in some other situation. We begin to broaden our awareness, of how our perspective really creates the life that we live, how our perspective creates our lives. And so the question for us always is this the life I want to live? Is this the way I want my life to be? Is this the way I want to interact with my friends? Is this the way I want to interact with strangers? Because people are always responding to us according to our own perspective, because it's always showing. In every aspect of our lives, our perspective is showing. And I think it's important for us to keep that in mind, to be aware of what my attitude is toward this group of people, that idea, this belief system, myself, my family, whatever the case may be. Looking at ourselves and being willing to consciously choose to shift our perspective. Being willing to consciously choose to change our attitudes. Being willing to consciously choose to live a better life. And when I want to live a better life, I want you to live a better life. Because I can't want something for myself that I don't want for everybody else. That's what oneness is all about. Ernest Holmes says, the doorway to the kingdom of God swings both ways. What we shut out will shut us out. The door, easy for me to say, the doorway to the kingdom of God swings both ways. What we shut out will shut us out. The doorway to the kingdom of God swings both ways. What we shut out will shut us out. And so, keeping that in mind, keeping in mind that we want to have an open heart, that we want to have room in our hearts for peace, that we want to have room in our hearts for love, that we want to have room in our hearts for availability to the divine. We want to have room in our hearts for everybody. For everybody. For oneness. That's what it's all about for us. That's how we change the world, opening our hearts so that there's room in our hearts for everyone. That doesn't mean we have to associate with everyone. It doesn't mean that we have to agree with everyone. It just means that we have to have open hearts. Because when our heart is closed in one place, that's a closed heart. It can't be closed over here and open over here, and then closed over here, and then open back there, and then closed to that person, and then that's not the way it works. A closed heart is a closed heart. Let's breathe that in. A closed heart is a closed heart. And so I'm asking you today to look within and see those places, those pockets where your heart may be closed. As we go into this Thanksgiving season, and this Thanksgiving Day, we're already in the season, but when we go into this Thanksgiving Day that's coming up, keeping our hearts open, just and being so grateful for the awareness that it's important to have an open heart. Being grateful not just on Thanksgiving Day, but every day. Let every day be Thanksgiving Day. Every day we give thanksgiving for our open hearts. Every day we give thanksgiving for consciously choosing to change the world. Every day we give thanksgiving for the awareness that it's up to us to change the world. Every day is a day of thanksgiving when we can give thanks for the opportunity to shift our perspective, to do something different, to live a different life, to let others live a different life. This is what we're giving thanks for this year, consciously choosing gratefulness, consciously choosing oneness, consciously choosing love, consciously choosing peace, consciously choosing to change the world. It really is up to us. Let's turn within. Let's take a breath together as we just move into that place of knowing and sensing and feeling God's presence right here, right now, right where we are. Just knowing that there's but one presence, one mind, one life, one breath, one mind, one activity, one intelligence, one. That one is my very life. That one is the life of each of us here this day. That one that I choose to call God is the source of us all. That one is that within which we live and move and have our being, and that lives and moves and has its being in each one of us. And so each of us, as I speak this word for us this day, I know that each of us can choose to shift our perspective, to let go of the old ways of being, to let go of the things that would hold us back, let go of the old attitudes and the old beliefs. And I'm speaking a word of wholeness where we can just open our hearts and open our minds and open our entire being to allow the oneness that is to reveal itself, the wholeness that is to reveal itself in and through and as our lives. And we do this with ease and with grace. This word is spoken for each and every one of us. And as we do this, healing is happening on every level of our being. Healing is happening for everyone. Healing is happening for this world. Healing is happening for this planet. As we open our hearts and we open our minds and we allow the healing to happen within each of us, it happens everywhere. And so as I open this circle of prayer, I pause momentarily so that you may speak the names of anyone you'd like held in prayer. You may speak their names silently or loud, and you may speak them now. And so for all those whose names were spoken here this day, I know that God is right where each of them is, blessing and keeping them. For anyone who needs a prayer this day, God is in the midst everywhere. In the midst of every circumstance, every situation, God is. For this awareness, I give great, great thanks. For this truth, I give great, great thanks. Thank you, Father, Mother God. Thank you, Infinite Presence. Thank you, Divine Mother. I know indeed that all is well. And so it is.